So the webinar is now being recorded. This public meeting is now being recorded. Councilman Cohen will give opening remarks in a couple of minutes. Once we have a few more people join the meeting. So I see the number of attendees is climbing up, so we'll just give people 1 or 2 more minutes. And then Councilman Cohen, I'll ask you to give your opening remarks, get us started. All right, I think we're good. Councilman, would you like to start tonight's meeting?
Thank you, Director. Director Brown has organized this meeting tonight. I'm Councilman Phil Cohen. I represent the 5th Ward of Hoboken, and I also chair the Community Development Committee, which is the committee that will be hearing and considering this as part of our review before it is presented to the City Council. I want to thank everyone who's attending here tonight. We colloquially call this the CVS project because that is where a lot of people recognize it. Obviously, it will not be a CVS site for long. We have a lot of thoughts and ideas about the future of this. Our committee has discussed various options. We had a community meeting about this a few months ago where we got feedback from the community with respect to various options. We learned a lot from that meeting, and then we also got written submissions from folks who shared their comments. Your ideas have been incorporated by the city's planning department. You're going to be hearing today from RG Theofield and RJ and Casey Wolf, and they're in the planning department of the city, and they will be making presentations to you. I also want to welcome Council President Emily Jabbour, who's joined the meeting. Welcome, Council President. And we're looking forward to the presentations, and we're also looking forward to hearing comments and reactions and questions. There'll be an opportunity for everyone who's attending this presentation to ask your questions, have them addressed, and we're looking forward to learning the latest designs and plans where we're at on this project. I also want to welcome a fellow member of the Community Development Committee, Councilman Doyle, who's also joined the meeting. Welcome, Councilman Doyle. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Community Development Director, Chris Brown, who will introduce our speakers. Thank you, Director.
No, thank you, Councilman. Yeah, so today, this afternoon, we're here to talk about or discuss the latest of our development with the Washington Observer Gateway Plan. We, as Councilman Cohen astutely stated, we all call it CVS redevelopment plan. This is all of our files, most of our folders all says CVS, but that's the current condition of the state of the property. The vision of this is to be a gateway to the city because if you're coming from the one of the 3 parking garages along River Street or Hoboken Terminal, the CVS building, that corner of Washington and Newark, or Washington and Newark would be one of the first things you see as you enter into the city in Washington Street. So this location is very important from a planning aspect and creating a strong downtown. And so that said, we will start the presentation with Casey Wolf giving some background on the planning process, where we've been getting up to this point to date. As Councilman Cohen also stated, we had a community meeting outside of the CVS location a few months back. It was well attended. I'd say it was a very successful event. So we'll talk about what feedback we gathered from that meeting. And RJ Theofield will then go into some more of the nuts and bolts of what the redevelopment plan will look like. So with that said, Casey Wolf. Just after Casey and RJ's presentation for the redevelopment plan, we'll then take questions and comments similar to the format of other meetings that we've had in this medium. Just raise your hand and we'll allow you to speak, to ask a question or make a comment.
Director, I before you turn it over to Casey, I noticed that Councilwoman Fisher has joined. If she could be promoted as well too, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thanks. All right, so we'll find Councilwoman Fisher in a second. And Casey, if you'd like to start your portion of the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining. So Chris went over a bit of our agenda for today. So I guess we'll start off with getting everyone oriented and situated at the redevelopment plan area, and then get into some public engagement results. So here you see, this is an aerial view of the plan area. That red arrow is pointing to the CVS building. There's a few other retail spaces in there along Washington Street. And then there is the surface parking lot between Washington and Hudson. Go to the next slide, then we can see from above, this includes all of block 210, which goes along Washington Street, and sort of the southern third of block 210.01. It also includes, you can probably see the sort of jagged line in the middle, which is the southern terminus of Court Street, and then all adjacent right-of-way to these lots is included within the rehabilitation area. So in total, within those black lines, the lot area on the site is about 70,000 square feet. So here are some existing conditions on the site. You'll see 1-story retail at the corner of Newark and Washington, and the surface parking lot. And here's another view of the surface parking lot. And you'll also see Court Street in this area in its present condition is about half as wide as it is in other sections. And we'll go into later how the plan addresses the future widening of this section. So the current zoning for the site is the C1 Hoboken Terminal District. It's a commercial zone. In the ordinance, the purpose of the zone is to promote economic job growth and a healthy business environment closest to New Jersey's second busiest transit hub. So the zone permits a wide variety of commercial and mixed uses in this, concentrated and busy area. The site is also within the H1O Historic Overlay District for Washington Street. And so any proposal within the redevelopment plan area would come under the review of the Hoboken Historic Preservation Commission. Even though none of the existing structures on the site are considered contributing structures to the historic district, they would be reviewing this project up against the ordinance's standards for new construction. So now we'll get into some of the public engagement results. First, from our outdoor open house session in October that we held at the entrance to CVS, and then the community questionnaire, the online survey that went out in the weeks that followed. So we had an outdoor session on the site where we presented 5 redevelopment concepts. They're very, as the term says, conceptual, general massings. They're trying to get people's take on their preferred concept, what could fit into the site, and a few other questions on the preferred mid-block design. How do we get a better pedestrian connection through the site, and other sort of general comments for the redevelopment plan area. We had about 52 participants at the meeting. And so you'll see in the concept that probably generated the most attention was concept E, and at the meeting itself got the most votes. So this included the provision of a performing arts center on site, and the city had hired a financial analysis consultant to evaluate the level of density that would be needed to incentivize a developer to provide, sort of a significant investment to build out some sort of performing arts center. And so that's, you'll see that reflected here with the max height of 280 feet along Observer and keeping the lower 70 feet along Washington. You'll see this concept here has a covered pedestrian connection, that blue line between Washington Street and going towards Hudson Place. Whereas in our feedback from the open house session, 81% preferred an open air pedestrian connection that would separate that would split the development on the site into 2 separate buildings. And so that was one of the clearest takeaways from the open house. And so some of the general feedback, written feedback we got on concept E, some people were very attracted to the idea of performing arts center on the site, but maybe had a few concerns about the associated density with it, and operational concerns about what it would take to make this a successful amenity at the site. And so moving on to the results from the community questionnaire, we had over 1,300 respondents. Again, the vast majority of people preferred an open air pedestrian connection, splitting the development into 2 separate buildings, and creating that mid-block east-west pedestrian connection. And 3 of the plan objectives that came out on top were enhancements to the Newark Street Plaza. That's sort of the existing space that you see in front of CVS. Again, pedestrian connection to Hoboken Terminal through the site. And then tied was maintaining a low building height along Washington Street. So you can see some examples of that pedestrian connection from other places with landscaping and seating along the way. In terms of the redevelopment concepts, concept C came out on top, almost twice as much as the next option. And you'll see in the next slide, it sort of presents a middle ground in terms of density versus the amenities provided. You get that open air plaza in concept C, and it has a max height of 140 feet along Observer and then 70 feet along Washington Street. And so taking all of this background information and public engagement, the plan has the following vision statement: that it would provide new mixed-use development that leverages the proximity of the rehabilitation area to the Hoboken Terminal Transit Hub to promote employment, economic opportunity, and community amenities, in addition to retail and social experiences. And some of the plan objectives you can see on the left: providing affordable housing in the area, establishing that pedestrian connection between Washington and Hudson Place, maximizing street level retail and the general pedestrian experience, and resiliency infrastructure improvements, which we'll discuss later. All right,
Thanks,
so
Kate.
now hand it over to RJ, who'll take over the redevelopment plan regulations. Thanks.
Thanks, Casey. So next, I'm going to go over the regulations that will guide future development at the site as part of the redevelopment plan. It's important to note that the redevelopment plan supersedes the existing C1 zoning that's there at the site right now. So the permitted uses on the site are organized into ground floor uses, upper floor uses, rooftop uses, and accessory uses. The ground floor uses are the retail and commercial uses that are currently permitted under the C1 zoning. So what this really means is that, after redevelopment, retail businesses such as CVS could remain as a permitted use at any new building that's developed here. And then on the upper floors, residential uses and select commercial businesses that are intended to really activate the area, like Casey mentioned before as part of the vision, are permitted. Rooftop bars and public amenity spaces are also permitted. Also to note that the plan wouldn't allow a strictly residential building. The building would require to have retail uses on the ground floor at minimum. So this illustration shows a conceptual model of maximizing the height and the amount of residential floor area that would be permitted under the baseline development for the plan. The actual building massing, when this, if the development really goes through, it would be likely different, different massing diagram. You'll notice that this massing is the same as presented in concept C. That was the most voted for in the survey. As the survey talked about, there was overwhelming support for the mid-block open air pedestrian connection. So this provides that as well as the lower height along Washington Street. So the plan divides the developable lots on the rehabilitation area into two different sections, Section A and Section B. Section A is this area highlighted in green that's closer to Newark and Washington Street. And the section here has open space and setback requirements, as Casey mentioned before, to widen Court Street to that 20-foot width in order to match the width that goes north of Newark Street. And then for both baseline and incentive development, the maximum height would be 70 feet above design floor elevation in Section A. You'll notice this maintains that lower building height that's allowed in C1 along Washington Street. So Section B is highlighted in orange. It fronts Observer Highway. This section features the pedestrian connection plaza, which has to be 40 feet in width. And it would span from Hudson Street to Washington Street, providing that crucial connection from Hudson Hoboken Terminal into the city. Section B, the maximum height permitted depends on the community benefit provided. So for baseline development, the maximum height would be 140 feet above design flood elevation. For an incentive development, the maximum height would be negotiated as part of a redevelopment agreement, but the plan would require that it has to be within the general scale and character of the surrounding area. I'll provide more detail on kind of the thought process and intentions on that aspect of the plan later on. So the redevelopment plan actually sets floor area ratio requirements for sections A and B, similar to height FAR requirements are established for baseline development and incentive development. So just for the sake of clarity for this presentation, we've summarized what those floor area ratios mean in square footage and number of units. So under baseline, a minimum of 40,000 square feet of non-residential space is required. And then in section A, which is the portion of the site closer to Newark Street, would allow 75 residential units. And section B, the one that's closer to Observer, would allow 247 units. So for a total of 322 units under baseline development. And then the plan also requires an average unit size of 850 square feet. So under the incentive development scenario, the same minimum non-residential requirement is there. It's 40,000 square feet. Similar to the baseline development, section A would also require 75 units as a maximum. And then similar to the height, the number of units that would be permitted in section B would be negotiated as part of a redevelopment agreement. And this would be something that the city would review the financials of the project to determine what additional floor area would be necessary to support that benefit, but always with the requirement that that floor area and number of units has to be within the general scale and character of the surrounding area. So as I mentioned earlier, for the baseline development, any project that meets baseline requirements would have to provide these design features and benefits. So the first being, at minimum, 10% affordable housing would be provided. Newark Street Plaza would require enhancements to it. There would be gateway features and public plaza enhancements throughout the site. The pedestrian connection would be provided and activated with retail and maintained. The Court Street alleyway, that portion of the site that goes through, would be widened, activated, and maintained. There would also be required to be contributions towards the rebuild by design resist elements, as well as enhanced stormwater and sewer management infrastructure. So the plan also includes a number of building design features that aim to distinguish the buildings and create architectural detail. So the plan requires chamfered corners at the intersection on section A by Newark and Washington, and on section B, an intersection of Washington and Observer. So these create prominent architectural details, and they create some space for corner plazas. The plan also requires gateway features. So gateway features are architectural details, landscaping, public art, any type of really streetscaping, that creates a sense of arrival and identity to the area to distinguish it as a gateway into the city, and after you've arrived into Hoboken, to really create a unique sense of place. As we mentioned before, the plan also requires a pedestrian connection. So this would be a public open space area that would have to be 40 feet in width, and it would span the entire length of the block connecting Hudson to Washington Street. So that gives you about an 8,800 square foot plaza. So here shown are some illustrative examples of what this plaza space could look like. The plan requires retail activation along all sides, landscaping, art, seating, a lot of the characteristics you're seeing in these examples here to really create a space that's welcoming and vibrant. The plan also requires improvements to the Newark Street Plaza. That was noted as one of the more important objectives for people in the survey. So we want to make sure we include that. There would be new street furniture, street trees, landscaping to really liven up the area. As I mentioned before, the Court Street alleyway would be widened to 20 feet. Currently, it ranges from 5 to 10 feet in width. You can kind of see this as the black line goes along here. It's not a straight perfect line, but what the plan would do would create this, would bring the buildings back along here where the yellow is to make this 20 feet wide. And along with that, there would be improvements to the actual streetscape along Court Street, new pavement, lighting, landscaping to make it a place that people want to be. So if the developer approaches with wanting to pursue incentive development and get this higher floor area and height requirements, they would have to provide at minimum 15% affordable housing. So that's 5% in addition to the baseline community benefits. And then also a performing arts center. And these benefits are in addition to the baseline community benefits. So you get everything that I showed a few slides before, plus one of these, or if not one, at least one of these. So we, in the survey and the public meeting, people were really interested in the idea of having a performing arts center at this site. And you can actually see on the image on the right, the historic Fabian Theater used to be at this exact intersection of Washington and Newark. So it's pretty interesting historical, aspect to it. But there were a lot of questions
Frank's
about
son here.
Most that.
Say Frank's son here.
So the additional floor that would be required to support this performing arts center, it really would depend on the financials of the project. So the plan sets forth a process for the city and the developer, if they propose a performing arts center, to review those financials and negotiate what additional height and floor area would be required to actually provide a performing arts center at the site. And through that negotiation process, we would also work out ownership and any of the other small details that goes into delivering a performing arts center for the city. So the plan also sets circulation and parking standards as well. In order to take advantage of the site's proximity to Hoboken Terminal, the plan does not set parking minimums, except if a performing arts center is proposed. It's important to note, though, that the plan does permit vehicle parking as an accessory use. So it can be proposed, but there's no minimum set by the plan. It would have to be proposed by the developer, the number of spaces if it's needed. And if the developer identifies a need for parking at the site, they would first be required to identify opportunities for shared parking and an existing garage off-site. And if ultimately they did propose putting parking on the site, car share spaces would be required for residential uses. And then last, the project would require the submission of a transportation demand management plan in order to reduce the need for single occupancy vehicles. Bicycle parking for the site would be one space for every dwelling unit. And then there also would be spaces for outdoor spaces for non-residential uses. And then as far as circulation on the site, the loading access would be limited to Observer Highway and Hudson Street. So making sure that our vibrant Washington Street retail corridor isn't having back of house loading access. That's more on Observer Highway. And there would also be designated pickup drop-off areas in the same location. So the plan also sets forth sustainable design, flood resiliency, and infrastructure requirements. One interesting aspect of the site is that there are a number of infrastructure components of the Rebuild by Design project that would be located adjacent to it. So you can see in these renderings here, the resist structure would be installed within the Washington Street right-of-way. And there would also be required to have temporary and permanent easements in the southwest corner of the site. So any project that gets proposed here would have to take these into consideration in its design. The plan also sets green infrastructure plan requirements. Green roofs would also be required. And any project would need to accommodate the North Hudson Sewerage Authority's access to an existing sewer line that is currently buried beneath the surface parking lot of Section B. So that would be something that the developer and the North Hudson Sewerage Authority would have to address prior to any development. And then also the construction would have at minimum a LEED silver or higher standard and be compliant with any flood damage protection ordinances. So now that we have a draft redevelopment plan, what are the steps before it's adopted and shovels are in the ground? Well, next, we'll gather the feedback that we received tonight and incorporate it into the draft plan. And then we'll we'll introduce the plan for first reading at city council meeting. It'll go to planning board for consistency review. And then it would be adopted by second reading at city council meeting. And then after that, the redevelopment negotiation process starts. So we're a bit away from shovels in the ground, but this is really an important milestone that gets us closer to that.
Hey, RJ, it's Phil. Just one quick thing. I think there could be an interim dot between now and the first reading, which is the Community Development Committee is going to hear what comes out of this as well before it gets presented to the city council.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. With that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Chris to lead question and answer.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, RJ. That was a really great presentation. Likewise, Casey, really great presentation. Thanks for conveying all the information we've been collecting and discussing for the past few months. So with that said, and also just to sort of give props to the planning team in-house. Normally when we have these, normally our redevelopment plans are done by outside consultants. In this case, we did the plan in-house. So big kudos to RJ, Casey, and Jessica Giorgiani. She's on parental leave, she's on maternity leave right now. But she had a big hand to play in getting this redevelopment plan to where it is today. So I see the first hand up is Councilwoman Fisher. So
Director, I just also want to acknowledge that Councilwoman Giattino and Councilman Russo are also here. So I just want to recognize them for being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilman Fisher.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't realize I would be first. First, thanks for the presentation. It was actually super helpful. And I didn't go to the first two meetings, so it was refreshing to kind of see not only the feedback that people gave, but that the feedback was incorporated into the plan. And I like a lot of the features that I think most of the public raised. A couple questions, some technical, some on maybe all technical. Is keeping the plaza on Newark, is that that's a priority that the public said they wanted? And I ask that because I hear more complaints about the existing plaza than not. And so just thought maybe there was a way to shift the footprint to make it more attractive or better used or something.
Do you want to ask all questions, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll ask all the questions. So that's one. The second one is the width of the sidewalk along Washington Street. And if it's how wide is it, and will it have the same feel of the width of the sidewalks that, on the next blocks as you go up there, they feel more expansive. And I'm not sure how wide or how far the setback is from the street on that lower part, but it would be great to have that part be wider. Third is the Court Street. If I recall correctly, Court Street actually went all the way down to Observer at one point, but the parking lot is just using Court Street right now. Was that ever vacated, or will it have to be vacated for part of this? And then not the last question, one question with Court Street is, what is contemplated for the back of this building onto Court Street? It's not meant to be loading, but is it garbage? Like, what will it be used for if we're going to go to this trouble to kind of widen it and restore it? And then I think the last question is just the general kind of, we always say that these aren't the actual massings, but then when we get the actual presentation, they look like these massings because they're just a box, and a developer is going to want to take as much of the box as possible for economic square footage. So is there a thought at all to have a little bit on especially the taller building, a little bit more setbacks, so we don't have just these big boxes? And two more questions, sorry. One is, how does this building now fit in with the traffic and circulation that is with the Elcor plan in that area? So as we're thinking about, drop-offs for taxis and just the general congestion that's going to literally happen at that corner, how do we factor in another 325 residential units there and all of the drop off, loading, trucks, et cetera, support for them? I always raise this building is now effectively the same size as one of the two Hudson T buildings. And we have a circle full of trucks delivering Ubers, et cetera, all day, every day. So how does that actually fit into, have we done any type of realistic circulation plan for this corner to take into account all of those uses? A lot of questions. Sorry. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah, sorry, that was enough.
All right. No, that's good. I appreciate the questions. I'm going to try to answer them all. Well, I'm going to have to defer to RJ or Casey on a couple of them. But for the first one, the Newark Street Plaza, the question was, what do we envision that site? Do we envision that area staying as is or being improved or changing in some way? I think in general, I agree with you in the general sense that it's currently underused in its current form. It could be a better site. It could be a better plaza for public use, and that's part of the onus on the developer to revitalizing that pocket plaza per se, to better activating it and breathing some new life in it through design. Maybe the cobblestones don't work. Maybe it needs some sort of new material. Maybe it's new curving. Maybe it's more resilient trees. That's something that we can discuss in sort of the next phase of it. But yeah, that's making that plaza a better space is a priority. The width of the sidewalk along Washington Street. I don't have the measurement. RJ or Casey, do you know how wide that stretch of Washington Street is compared to other adjacent?
I don't know the width, but I do know the sidewalk width is the same as it is going north. It just looks more narrow currently because there's an overhang with the CVS building. So the actual face of the CVS building is to the lot line, and then there's about like a 6-foot overhang. So it seems like it's a smaller sidewalk than it is further north.
And is that lot line parallel or whatever with the lot line on the next block, or does it come out? It is parallel. It's the same.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident it is.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, RJ. And to the point about Court Street, so I'm looking at the draft plan that we have right now, and just verbatim, what we have in here is that it shall be activated with ground floor retail, commercial, entertainment uses, and/or residential lobbies and streetscape improvements. So that would be that stretch of Court Street from Newark Street to the pedestrian connection, what we're calling the pedestrian connection in the plan that would connect Hudson Street and Washington Street. And as far as the vacation or its existing condition, I don't believe it's been vacated. That is city right away. And there also is a stretch closer to Observer where there is a 20-foot interceptor easement.
Yeah.
So we have to look to see how that jives. But for the most part, the
reason, Chris, the reason why I raise that, if it is city property that they're looking to use, we should just factor that into, that's the city's contribution to this. So kind of we want to have a performing arts center. They want a strip of what would have been a right of way vacated, right? Like we that has real value, because without vacating that piece and effectively giving it to this developer, they wouldn't be able to build this at all. And so it has huge value to them.
Sure. Yeah, and I think so. When you look at the tax maps, it actually varies between 5 and 10 feet. We're actually asking them to essentially chip in some more of their
Yeah.
property to widen Court Street. And whether that's a public access easement or some other mechanism. But yes, absolutely, that will be considered when we get to that point in the negotiation. In terms of massings, step backs, I would have to, RJ or Casey, what were you probably have the step backs more at your fingertips than I, for
Page
especially
38.
on, I know on section A, the step back is after, yeah, there it is, thank you. Yeah, the step back is at about 60 feet. And then, yeah, and there's another step back on the upper level on section B, which is at about 60 feet as well. You know, in terms so just to, and you know, I'll take a step back. So whatever the square footage of this rendering, I'm gonna put out a number because I don't have the exact number offhand. Say 325,000 square feet. This 325,000 square feet is essentially the economic value of building as of right, without all the encumbrances. So that's how we came up with this kind of massing in terms of what would it take for a developer to build, to go past the as of right development. So that's how we came up with this massing. It's purely just when we brought eConsult on board to figure out how do you build a performing arts center, we did this kind of exercise, and that's how we came up with the stretch of modeling. But yeah, we can look at the setbacks and potentially add in, something on possibly the upper floors to push the buildings back in. But this is, like I said, it was just a modeling exercise.
I would just add that, yeah, we use these massings for the public engagement, and they are not included in the plan itself. We just have the FAR
Yeah.
maximums for sections A and B.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is if the massings represent the square footage that you're talking about, you're just creating a box. And if they're going to get to have that much square footage, I mean, if you look at all of the buildings, they're boxy because, of course, instead of having setbacks, they would much rather be able to use all of the economic square feet. And the only way for them to be able to get all of that economic square feet is, if you're telling them to have setbacks, would be to go taller, right? Like, so the box that you're showing is typically the box that we end up with, because you show it that way without actually putting in more of a design around the building, or just a requirement for higher level setbacks. So
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I mean, to that point, we're not presenting this as a model in the plan for the developer to build to. We were just trying to figure out what sort of our baseline where we were starting as a kind of building, considering hallways are about 60 feet in width to accompany a hallway and 2 units. And it was just, it was a modeling exercise. And then regarding traffic and circulation, yeah, I mean, we haven't gotten to the point of doing or getting into the nitty-gritty with circulation and how X number of units would impact circulation on the area. That would be something that we would do as part of the redevelopment agreement stage. And to that point, I mean, we do have elements of the plan that speak to reducing vehicle ownership, such as, we're not requiring parking for the residential portion of the building. We're doing one-to-one bike parking. We're requiring a TDM plan as part of the redevelopment, redevelopment agreement negotiations. So we're mindful of the impact on the circulation pattern on the grid. But that would be part of the next stage in the process. Did that cover somewhere?
yeah. Yeah, it does. I think the only thing I would say is two things. One is, at some point, we really need to do a study of the real needs of residents, especially if they don't have cars. So how often do they use Uber? How often do they have Amazon delivered? How often, how often do they require vehicle trips, even if they don't have cars? Where do they go and what the impact is to circulation? And agreeing like a plan without having that just seems like it's an incomplete plan. That's just my view. Oh, that's right. Anyway, but yeah, you answered my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And Councilwoman Giatino, I see that you have your hand up as well. Councilwoman Giatino,
Sorry, now you can hear me.
no worries.
A quick question about the art center.
Yeah.
You had, did you say they couldn't build an orchestra pit?
No,
Did you say something about an orchestra pit?
no, I don't think so. I think that's for them to solve. That would be for the property owner or for the developer to solve.
And then the other, you said, you spoke to someone about how to build, like a professional about how to build out, or Casey, I believe you mentioned it, how to build out a performing arts center?
Their task was to evaluate how much density would be needed to incentivize the developer to invest in a performing arts center to build it out on the site. So that they used some comps from the area. We had a sort of general guideline of about, I think, 500 to 800 seat theater. Very, nothing set in stone in terms of the details of the pack, but what would entice a developer to build that out?
So it
Right.
wasn't like, it wasn't an expert in building theaters that we talked to. It was just someone who did the economics of it.
Exactly. Yeah. An economic analysis. Yeah.
Got it.
I believe that they did speak with a few other performing arts centers in the area. I mean, while they themselves are not experts, they did consult with a few other PACs nearby.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilwoman. And I don't see any more council people with their hands raised, so I'm going to move on to the general public, and I'm going to start with Cheryl Fallick. Hey, Cheryl.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I think I have 6 questions, a few of which are just yes and no questions. The first one is on the Hudson Street part of this development, is it just the parking lot from the CVS, or are all the, or any of the existing buildings on Hudson Street part of this?
It
I
was-
guess
It
the
would just
spa
be
diner. Yeah.
Just
the parking lot.
Good, thank you. Now, I know that we keep calling the 140 feet, 14 stories essentially, Observer Highway, but is anybody going to also admit that that's also now on, even though it's the side of the building, it's also on Washington Street, effectively creating a new prevailing height on Washington Street? Like, I have a concern about that. And just any thoughts, because this is the first time we're getting something 14 plus stories on Washington Street. And there's a lot of corporate ownership of Washington Street. So are you seeing it my way that we've created a new prevailing height on Washington Street?
So
Okay. Yeah.
I would defer to I can certainly see your point, and I can certainly see where the objection would be. I would say that while it's on Washington Street, it's also consistent with it's on Observer Highway, which is consistent with other proposed buildings the proposed Irby building, Newman Leathers. It's across the street from Hoboken Yard project, which is 28, the residential building is 28 stories. So while I can see the, the
You're
concern.
acknowledging the concern, but you're
Yeah.
pointing out other things. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah,
And it's a big concern for me, but now I hear you that there's no required car parking, but there is a one-on-one bike parking. So we're gonna have parking. It's just gonna be for alternative transportation. Is that correct?
yes, unless the developer would have to make the case almost for providing parking on the site.
Okay, is there any consideration that maybe we actually don't need one bike space for every? Not everybody has a bike in the same way that not everybody has a car. So we're in, just a thought. I'm certainly not opposed to bike parking, but you know, maybe it's not necessarily go to the extreme, you know, so.
It's noted. I would just say that bike parking takes up far less parking than vehicle parking. So we think that it's pretty feasible to add in, you know, even if it was like quarter, you know, 3/4, 0.75 to 1, you know, so you have, you know, 75% of the spaces for 75% ratio. What's
Sure.
another 25% with their,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how much space. I don't think that really eats into that much, but yeah, I your point is noted.
Great. That's 3 down, 3 to go. We talked about incentive height. Meaning 2 things were mentioned, the Performing Arts Center and the 15% affordable housing. But we never capped that incentive height. And my concern is, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the majority of the residents who took the quiz wanted Plan C, which was the the 14 store, what you have there. There was some interest in this Performing Arts Center, which required 28, horrific amount of stories. And we keep talking about this Performing Arts Center. We've talked about incentive height, and am I correct to be concerned that we're going to put forward Plan C, and before you know it, amendment, and what we're actually going to end up with is Plan E, because that's what we really want to do.
So
And we're just not willing to, we're trying to show the community we're listening, but we're not really. And I know that sounded negative. I don't mean it to. I just think I'm hearing we're getting Plan E no matter what we say in the end.
no, actually, so we kind of looked at it from the opposite approach. So taking a step back, right? The Performing Arts Center, that the way that eConsult measured what kind of a performing arts center would go into the space, I think it was something like 500 seats, and it would be something that would be fully built out and and owned an operator, or they'd sell it to an operator. So that resulted in 28 stories. It might be something that it's they're just creating a box and then they're deeding it to a nonprofit, and the nonprofit has to raise money and that to build it out. And under that scenario, I don't think it would be 28 stories. It would be less, because they're putting in less. They're not building out a space. So depending on the size, depending on the ownership model, it's not a set number. So we didn't want to commit to a height. We didn't want to say, the incentive height is 28 stories. You can get up to 28 stories, because in that scenario, yeah, we're there 28 stories, or that the plan reflects that. So that's written in the plan, and that could be something that's trying that could be effectuated, right? We kind of looked at it as we didn't want to commit to something, but we wanted to say that it's going to be within the scale of the neighborhood. So depending on what actually is proposed, that height it doesn't have to be that 28 story. It doesn't have to be that. So we kind of looked at it from the opposite end. They were the sort of opposite to how you were sort of perceiving it. I don't know. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I understand. Between the two, because there was two that were mentioned, the performing arts space and 15% affordable housing. How are we putting that on the table? Like, are we saying you could do this or this, you could do both? We have a preference for the performing arts, or, you know what I mean? Or is that just suggestions to the developer where you'll come back to them and say, or, you know, wow us with something else? Like, in other words, are these two boxes, or?
No, I think that, well, I think that we may want to say including but not limited to.
Mhm.
But, you know, that's why we're having this meeting and we want to hear
Got
from
it.
everyone.
Understood.
And if it's, you know, if it's something where it's better to, you know, to have that including but not limited to, and have some other options for could what could create that incentive development. Um, eh, that's something that we're open to, and that's something that we could incorporate into the plan.
And then last question, and this is not something that I'm suggesting, but just maybe putting it out there. Well, there's two, but the other one is more theoretical. Have you considered, with regard to the affordable housing, looking in terms of designating it, like we have the veterans housing, we have artist housing, senior housing, or just traditional 10%? Has there any thought been to looking at what our existing community may need, or what may enhance, you know, our demographics for
Mhm.
for the affordable housing portion?
So, Casey, do you know, did we put this site? I don't think we did, but this site isn't included in our housing element that's going to, that will be.
No, it's not, I don't
No,
think.
it wouldn't be, but it would, you know, obviously conform to UHAC standards. I don't think we've really considered a special, the wrong word, special interest for the affordable, but it's.
Would you,
consider.
as opposed to UHAC, would you? Is that
Well,
even some?
when it would have to, no, it would have to comply with UHAC, but under UHAC, you could do family, you could do senior, we could do, or special needs housing. So that's on the table. That is consistent with UHAC. I think that we'd have to get to the redevelopment agreement stage to really give you
Talk about
more-
that,
to
sure.
talk about that, but it's 100, it's very possible that this could be, you know, if this were developed, we could use it for senior housing or special needs housing.
And lastly, just sort of a big theoretical question. Is anybody the least bit concerned about the massive amount of development that's happening in the first ward? Because we have so many redevelopment projects. I just don't know when it's going to end. And that's could be for another day. You don't really need to answer. Maybe that's just my personal concern. And that would be it. Thank you.
All I would say to that is going back to, you know, the concern about traffic and circulation. Like, now is the time to kind of look at the entire first ward and look at how all these projects are going to work together from a realistic, not a theoretical. Well, it has to be theoretical, but between, you know, all of Elcor, the hotel, this project, really taking a look at what it means to, not even just that they're all large developments, they're all large residential developments, which just brings, you know, a lot of service requirements to that area. And we should take a step back and look at all of that before we approve anything more, I think, in this area. And do like a holistic, you know, area review of traffic and circulation and expected population growth, you know, in that area, what it means for our schools, what it means for just everything. Instead of the patchwork quilt approach, which we're taking.
Sounds like a build-out analysis.
Yeah. But we have it. We have it now.
We've been
it shouldn't
trying for
be
years,
taken-
Jim. We've been trying
No.
for years, buddy.
Mike, we have one, right? We had one a few years ago that we actually never reviewed, but now that we have this corner, kind of a micro neighborhood build out analysis, and really what the implications of, you know, adding so many residential uses in a 3 square block area.
Tiffany, we don't have a build out analysis. We're not talking about We're talking about a full build out analysis.
Yeah.
No, we do,
From what we have.
Councilwoman, we do. Jessica did it. But anyway, I don't mean to cut you off, but I would love to hear from the public
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. And thank you for your comments. Sean Ianquinto, I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Hey guys.
Hey, Sean.
By the way, just my last name is Americanized, so it's just Iaquinto.
Oh,
So
apologies.
you were trying your best to, my parents thought it'd be funny to put Irish first name and Italian last name together, and this is what you got. Good old American. But as for the project, I love it, except for the 28-story building. I agree with a lot of the comments, Cheryl's comments, and I agree with Councilwoman Fisher's comments. I don't mind the idea of giving back a little bit of space at the Newark Plaza that's not even used for anything. It was a good idea to have it be used for something, but really never got anything done there. So I'm not against the idea if there's a give back, if you will. I think I messaged you and others about the idea of, I know we're kind of talking about the everyone's really focused on the art center idea. I was thinking more of the common man idea of like, wouldn't it be nice if there was an Alamo Draft House movie theater in this location, or any kind of movie theater? We lost our movie theater, and it would be nice to have something like that. I know you can do the same with the design of the art center too, but something that would be a little bit more interesting to the common public. I think a lot of these high-end ideas are great for a certain percentage of our populace. But I think that, something that's a little bit more inclusive for everybody would be a movie theater or something along those lines, or a Brooklyn Bowl or bowling center that, you have Brooklyn Bowl where they do small concerts. We lost Maxwell's. We don't have any place to really listen to like small music area in Hoboken anymore, like a, a concert kind of idea. That's the idea of a Brooklyn Bowl kind of thing, where you have a bowling alley and you can convert it. And lastly, with Cheryl brought up some really good points. We have all these new buildings that we're planning on building down there. Where's everybody going food shopping? I live in the first ward. I have a car. I'm lucky. So I'm able to jump in my car, go over to the Acme over in Jersey City on 15th Street there on Myron Boulevard. And that's where I go food shopping, because it's a little bit quieter than our supermarkets that we have in town. I mean, it's like, Hunger Games whenever you're going to the shopping center here in town. So I just want to know where the people are planning on going food shopping. Sobsi's on Bloomfield closed down, right? We had the other supermarket that closed down by 333 River Street. There's really only along Washington Street, like Aspen, and I forget what the other name of the place was that was there on Washington and 2nd Street. Organic Basic Food, right? Is that the one that's over on there? So it's like you kind of have sort of some options, but really there's not a lot of good shopping center options. So that would be something that, if we were going back to Councilwoman Fisher's idea, we should be asking questions like, hey, before we build all this, we should be asking, where are these people going food shopping where they don't have any cars in their 300, unit building, and, where are they going to walk to? And then you can say, well, it's only a 2-block walk to these, Aspen Marketplace or something like that, but there's not a lot of, we seem to be losing a lot of food shopping options in the first ward. We don't get a lot of, good opportunities unless you have a car like me. But I really, and again, I want to strongly state, I hate the 28-story building. I don't care about the give backs at that point, and that shouldn't even be a thing that we're throwing out there. 14 should be the hard stop on the size of the building. And otherwise, everything else looks, everything else. I love the idea of reclaiming Court Street and the pedestrian plaza I really like. But if there's some other way that we can, look to have a movie theater added, I really love the idea of a movie theater being added over a, kind of the art center space, but that's just me. And I would like to see, maybe you throw it out there to the public to vote on something like that. If you said, hey, what would you rather have, a movie theater or an art center? See what they say. All right, that's all I got. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. No, those are really great points. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sean. So Paul Presenzano, you are the next speaker. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Good evening. Thank you, Director Brown. A couple comments here. We always talk about everybody having a seat at the table. And if we're only doing just one mode of transportation, what do we do to everybody else? How do we handle our people that have special needs? What are we doing for EV stations for electric cars, which are pushing? So I'm just trying to figure out that we're building, the L Core has no, from what I understand, has no parking. This building will have no parking. And we're potentially looking at an 800-seated arena. I don't think Hoboken will support that itself. What I'm concerned is how do we attract visitors to come into town if they have difficulty coming in? Because we know New Jersey Transit shuts down essentially at 10:30 at night. And if you're coming from Morristown, it's not going to happen. So I wanted to know why we're only picking one mode of transportation in the first ward and assuming everybody's just going to use their feet to walk it or two wheels to come there. I'm all happy. I'm for that. And I'd like to see different modes of transportation, but we can't ignore that there are four wheels that still exist out there. One other thing I wanted to point out that if we are going to build this high, should we make this kind of a destination and actually a part of the plan, put a restaurant on top that kind of has really panoramic views that'll be unique that, you know, of the city and around us so that we can make it a destination. You come to dinner, you go on the rooftop, you have dinner, you come downstairs, you come to the either the bowl or you come to the arena. Just wondering if you could ask some answer. That was a statement, and I wanted to know if you could answer some questions about every mode of transportation getting acknowledged here, not just one.
No, thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. And I think, I mean, I'm looking at the permitted uses. I know we've discussed having a public rooftop restaurant as a permitted use in the redevelopment plan.
Chris, if I may, directly to the east of the 1,440-foot building is the Elcor 200 to 300-foot building with a restaurant on the top, which, you know, it just for perspective, it'll be higher and perhaps blocking the views of this rooftop. So it wouldn't be unique. It would just be unusual, perhaps, to have it here.
From the hotel too.
Yeah, the hotel has one. Thanks, Councilman. Thanks, Councilman and Councilwoman. Yes, but we do have a rooftop bar is a permitted use. And then the second question, Paul, the first question was regarding car priority. I believe the gist of it is prioritizing bikes over cars or not.
No, just all modes of
acknowledging-
transportation, not just everybody. So everybody gets an equal. I mean, you could do a third. It just everybody gets a seat at the table. I think that's usually how it works in society today. So what I'm saying is, has there something been explored where all modes of transportation can be addressed equally and make everybody happy from that standpoint, especially if we're bringing in visitors with our transit system not at the level it probably should be.
Right. So, I mean, as specific to this development, we don't know what the scale of this development will be. We don't know. I mean, for example, there is RJ touched on it, or RJ or Casey, I forgot which portion this was touched on, but there's an NHSA easement in the parking lot on Observer. It runs from Observer, it makes a 90-degree turn, and then it goes to Hudson Street. Thanks. Then it goes over to Hudson Street. So there's a very heavy lift that the property owner, the developer, needs to make with NHSA to either relocate that interceptor or to I'd say to relocate it. I think that's the only thing that they could do. Now, how they do that is that's their problem to solve, but they can't build unless that is addressed. So the development is contingent on that. Now, if they can't solve for that problem, then, you know, the massing or whatever the square footage that we're assuming, that all changes. So how we don't, I mean, honestly, we really don't know what kind of building will go here. We know, you know, general principles are, we want to have something that activates the pedestrian realm. We want this to be a gateway. We want ground floor retail. We want Court Street to be widened. We want Newark Street, that plaza on Newark Street to be redesigned in a way that's more accommodating and pedestrian friendly. We want the ground floor retail, right? So those are the general, you know, we want something that's going to accommodate rebuild by design. But, you know, besides that, we're not there yet in terms of what this would, how many units this would generate. So therefore it's difficult to have the conversation of how many units this is going to result in. And so, you know, to talk about traffic and what its impact is going to be, I mean, really, we're not there at that stage to say what that impact is going to be. I mean, but we do know that from a planning perspective, we know that when you build parking, people are going to park their cars there, and people are going to continue driving down Washington Street, and they're going to park their cars in the building. So by providing parking, you get cars. By not providing parking, you de-incentivize cars. So so that's the rationale. So I don't know if that helps to address or kind of shows you what we're thinking. But that's kind of where we're coming from with the development scheme. Does that help?
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And appreciate your questions and comments. Andrea McCoy, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Great. Oh, good. Okay. So I guess I'll pick up where you left off. The de-incentivizing of the cars, I think, I don't know if that's really, it's a great idea, but it's just not realistic. I agree with Paul, because you do have people with special needs. You have older people, you have people coming into town with cars for business purposes. The shopping, not everybody can do walking and bikes. You know, so I'm concerned, I guess that was my biggest concern, was that we have parking there. That's going to disappear. I agree. I think it's like a waste of space to just have nothing but cars parked in that whole space right now. But it does serve a purpose, and people aren't going to stop using cars because this is like a pass-through area. So I do have concerns. I mean, as it is, there's been so much overdevelopment all along the waterfront that we have nothing but gridlock anyway. I mean, cars aren't, I don't think they're going to go away. You know, whether we want them to or not. I agreed with Tiffany in that the Newark Plaza. I had some concerns about Newark Plaza just because, I mean, that's been a disaster. Again, there's gridlock coming up Newark to turn onto Washington. I kind of always felt like that should just go back to what it was. But to be able to park so I have concerns about traffic. If you're going to be building that many more units, again, that impact circulation. You've got people there's going to be shuttles. People are going to need to get somewhere. Not everybody's going to be, you know, walking or like using a scooter or a bike. I mean, that's great if you're like under 30. The performing arts, yes, again, that comes back to the parking. That's going to create a whole new influx of traffic. Whether it's not all going to be public transportation. And I had questions about like affordable housing. I haven't been to a lot of the they allow this, like they put it as part of the development, but then when it comes down to it, you see it. I've only seen a couple of like affordable units. I see them like advertised, and they're basically like the worst possible, like they kind of throw it in there, but it's to meet with this, to comply, but it ends up not really being anything that's desirable or even like livable. Like they're very tiny spaces. So I saw that you had an 850 square foot requirement, and just wondering, you know, how that's gonna shake out. I had a suggestion for because of all the deliveries, and we do have Amazon, that maybe that something should be provided for, like like an Amazon locker space in this development. And I agreed with Cheryl about the overdevelopment. I agreed with Sean about the possibility of a movie theater versus a performing arts, and also the building height. And yeah, I guess that's basically it. Those are all my concerns. My main concern is the loss of parking and what you're going to do. The other idea I had is I know the building plan, the developers are going to come up with this, but maybe to address what Tiffany was talking about, because she's right, uptown you've got that circular driveway and it's jam packed with deliveries and Ubers and everything. Maybe you would need something like that, like where the entrance of the building would kind of be set back. You'd need to have parking on one side, definitely, and then some kind of like driveway that's not on Newark or Washington, where drop-offs can be made and deliveries can be made. Like a setback, like arched kind of circular driveway.
So that's not outside the question. I mean, we're anticipating that drop-offs, deliveries would happen on Observer and to a lesser extent on Hudson Street. How that's designed is still, you know, to be determined, because we haven't gotten to that stage. We're just sort of very much conceptual at this point. Regarding the question of parking, or just the lack of parking in the site. I mean, again, you know, this site is it's across the street from Hoboken Terminal. So, and that's why I think, you know, from perspective of this site, Hoboken Yard, the parking minimums were, and the post office, the parking minimums were 0 to close to 0, because of that close proximity to Hoboken Terminal. And then the question about affordable housing. So our ordinance requires that there's a 10% set aside, and those units that are set aside have to be the same quality as the market rate units in buildings where there are those inclusive units provided. So if you have an example of a building that you've seen that's gone up and that has a unit that's not, you know, that's, you know, shabby or subpar to the other market rate units that have been developed, I would, you know, urge you can shoot me an email, cbrown@hobokennj.gov, cbrown@hobokennj.gov, and, you know, feel free to let me know what development you're referring to, and we'll take a look. But all of the developments that have been created with the 10% set aside ordinance have the same consistency, the same quality with the affordable units as with the market rate units.
I'm talking, well, I can send you an email, but I'm talking about it's like a newer building. It's back across from, I forget the name of it. It's across from the bus parking lot. It's like on 14th. It's near the viaduct back there. It was just like basically a tiny little space, barely room for a bed, overlooking the bus parking lot.
Yeah, let's
Like,
yeah.
that's
Feel
the
free to
affordable unit that what they were offering.
feel
And
free
they're
to
like,
feel free to. I don't want to. You know, we don't have to get into the details on this. I would say please shoot me an email and we can continue the conversation.
I'm just, well, you're saying something about the post office. I'm not clear on why there's no parking, because the terminal is there. That's it's not making sense to me. I feel like because there's a terminal there needs to be parking.
Well, the terminal has several modes of public transportation into New York City and the surrounding region at large. So that's why we see it as an alternative to.
But there's people parking using the paid lots right now for a reason. I'm thinking it's because either for business on Washington Street or because it's near the terminal. It just because there's public transportation doesn't mean can't be. I mean, I think that it could or should be possible to do both. I don't understand why that's one cancels out the other.
That's, I mean, I see your point. And we can, we'll consider it, and we'll have that conversation about the parking, about parking minimums with the subcommittee.
Great, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to go to Heron Hale.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I had 3 questions. Some of them have already been mentioned. I guess first I'll be back on the last 2 commenters, and I think that area specifically needs a pretty sizable loading dock. I think you mentioned it would be placed on Observer. But wouldn't that just cause more traffic coming from the PATH station to leave town? I would also love to see a designated, aside from the loading dock, pickup and drop off zone. I think especially downtown in our neighborhood, the Ubers can sort of just really do whatever they want. Next question, I take the PATH pretty early at 5:30 a.m. And that Newark Street Plaza can be pretty sketchy at times. And the plans that you guys have set forth have basically added additional corridors where people can hang out. I wouldn't be able to see anyone from around the corner if I was walking towards the PATH that early in the morning. Is there any plan for safety or perhaps a police officer to be stationed there? And finally, talking about the affordable housing, I understand that 15% is being designated, and I believe this was mentioned, but I would love to see a certain portion of that dedicated for workforce housing, for teachers, for police officers, trainers working in town. I think there's a real lack of space that is affordable for our teachers and our police officers. And I would love to see more of those professions being kept in town, in the neighborhood that they work in. That's it, just a suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Heron. I appreciate it. Did you want me to address your, I mean, I guess in terms of what I heard were questions, in terms of the design of the loading space, that's something to be, or the loading situation, that's something that we'd have to get to later on as we negotiate a redevelopment agreement and look at what the proposal on the site would be. Yeah, the plaza, the corridor spaces, the public spaces that are proposed here. Yeah, we understand that concern, and the plan stipulates, or the plan will stipulate that any public space proposed in this project and a future project, it would mirror city code in terms of hours of operation, in terms of when a space can be open to the public. And of course, things like lighting and additional security measures would be a design, something that we can discuss later in the process. In terms of affordable housing, you said 15%, the baseline is 10%, the 15% is the incentive. And that your comment on workforce housing is duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, I just want to clarify that in terms of the placement of loading, we have a pretty big site constraint with the rebuild by design resist element. So that was a big factor in why the loading is conceived at that point. It can't couldn't go through the resist element at any point along Observer or along most of Washington Street or the western half of Observer. So that's why it's located there.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want it on Washington Street, and so that's why most of Observer Highway would be dedicated for a loading area. Thanks, Casey. Thank you, Heron. I appreciate your comments. Chris Adair, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Hi there, this is Chris Adair. Thanks, Director Brown, for letting me speak. I had a couple comments. Actually, one, I wanted to say thank you for not having car parking minimums. I know there's been couple people commenting on why we're not considering putting more car parking there. And I think when you look at cities like Buffalo, New York, and Hartford, Connecticut, and Santa Monica, California, they're all moving in this direction where we're getting rid of car parking minimums, particularly I think in areas like this where you have this transportation hub that's literally a block away. We know what we've learned over the course of time is that when we invite more cars in, we just get more car traffic. And when we can provide public transportation, that nullifies the need for many, many cars. Not all cars, of course. Cars will never go away. But I wanted to say thank you for waiving that in this development. I hope to see that happen in more developments through the city. As far as bicycle parking, I'm happy to see that's been accounted for. I would actually venture to say that you could do more than one bicycle parking space per unit. If you have 2 people living in an apartment, each one might have a bike. If you have a family of 4, there could be 4 bikes. And we know that bicycles take up significantly less space to store than cars. A Chevy Suburban is 18 feet long and 5 feet wide. That's a lot of bikes that you could park in that one parking space that a car would take up. So I would encourage us to have some bicycle parking minimums, and it should be more than 1 for 1. I would also say that we're going to have a certain amount of retail here, and it would be, I know that I think there was a slide that talked about there's going to be some retail bike parking, but I think there should be a certain number depending on what the square footage and what type of retail is there. We're going to need that bicycle parking. So we need to actually increase bicycle parking here in this site and really all of the sites that we're building out. And also thinking about short and long-term bicycle parking too. It's not just people storing their bike for a week. Sometimes it's people coming in, dropping things off. Sometimes they're storing it overnight. So having those different options for bike parking is great. I would also, I know a couple people have brought up the idea of more loading zones, and I understand there's some limitations to that because of the resist structure. But yeah, I think loading zones are super important, especially when we're wanting people to not drive their personal vehicles. We have to really take that into consideration. So I think that is to make sure that we have good loading zones would be great. And then the last element I wanted to talk about was I noticed the resist structure on Washington Street there is on, it looks like on the rendering, I know these are just renderings on the sidewalk. I actually think this is a really great opportunity to put that resist structure in the street and give us the protected bike lane along that stretch of Washington Street right there on the first block. That could be the very first phase of getting our class 1 protected bike lane along Washington Street. So I would encourage you guys to maybe look at that as an option where we could incorporate that resist structure as the part of the protected bike lane and incorporate that in part of this redevelopment. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We appreciate your comments. I would just say with regards to the resist structure, that's been the alignment on the resist structure has been determined by DEP, and I don't think there's really much at this point that we can do to move that alignment structure. So or move that structure. So that's unfortunately where we're at in with the process. But if you'd like to discuss that more offline, you can feel free to email me, cbrown@hobokenNJ.gov.
All right, thanks, Director Brown.
Thank you. Thanks for your questions and comments. Joe Gallo, I'm going to allow you to talk. Hey, Joe.
Can you hear me, Chris?
Yep, can hear you.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. A couple of things. I just wanted to answer a couple of things that that I heard from other people, and I think it's been a very productive conversation. Earlier, there was a gentleman who was speaking about his concern about having shopping, food shopping. I saw an updated design for the Chambord building, and that just as an FYI, who knows if it'll ever make it, but it does include a shopping center with parking, very similar to Trader Joe's, where you come in, you park, you get your groceries and leave. As of course, I'm somebody who works in the arts, and I think that we may be having hearing the words performing arts center might be actually limiting the view of some people. I think that a performing arts center could have all of the things that people are requesting. It can certainly have and or show movies within it. It can have concerts as well. I think, thinking that when you hear performing arts center and thinking it's only live, a live venue that does musicals, might be a limiting way to look at what it actually could provide to the community. I think all those needs could be met. I have a quick question for you, Chris, and maybe you answered it earlier and I missed it, but was the affordable housing, the incentive portion of the affordable housing and the performing arts center, was it an either or between the 15% affordable housing and the performing arts center? Was that how I was reading it, or did you already answer that? Did I miss that?
No, so I mean the baseline, so the baseline has to be 10% affordable housing.
Okay.
So if they were, so if they built as of right, as of zoning, and the property owner could do that, if they built as of right, no affordable housing. They don't have to, and that's without going through, and that's if this redevelopment plan ever gets adopted or whatever. Now, if we go forward with the redevelopment plan under the baseline, whatever the baseline that they're building, there's a 10% set aside. So that's, no questions, that's required. If they want to go higher, if they want to go larger than the baseline, they have, and this is something that we're still trying to figure out how to treat in the redevelopment plan in terms of, is it including but not limited to? Is it just these two specific things? I think that it's probably more of a including but not limited to, so that we don't box ourselves in the future. But that's a conversation. But it could be a performing arts center or 15% affordable, or depending on the numbers, maybe it could be both. But right now those are just kind of the two idea options for that incentive scenario.
Right. And again, I just want to repeat that, my support for the idea of a performing arts center. And I believe, again, it could have a multi-purpose, it's not, even 500 to 800 seats as somebody in the business even sounds slightly large from my perspective. But again, I know this is all just a conversation, but I think that it can meet all the needs of the community in a wide variety of ways. My final question for you, though, is this. I mean, so the residential would be rentals, correct?
I mean, that we haven't gotten to that point in deciding the ownership structure of the building. I want to say probably, but depending on the project, when at the time that it comes online, that's a question for the property owner.
Okay, and when we talked about affordable housing, you mentioned, is it UHAC? Is that how you say it? UHAC, right?
Yes, Uniform Housing Administrative Code.
Right, and you said that any affordable housing had to fall under their guidelines, correct?
Correct.
So, and you mentioned senior and special needs, but does workforce housing and or artist housing fall under their guidelines?
No, it does not.
Okay, so there is never going to be artist housing or workforce housing in that development or any new development in Hoboken?
I mean, no, I wouldn't say that. That's we haven't put out the draft plan yet. We haven't,
As you know,
still-
I'm a
we're still-
huge fan. I'm a huge fan of the workforce housing program, and I would love to see it continue. And I concur with the woman who was sorry, I didn't catch your name, who was also touting it before. I mean, I think, a community that doesn't provide, a place for the nurses, the teachers, the firemen is shooting itself in the foot. And I know that, under the UHAC, I guess the affordable housing, and I think, of course, I'm a fan of affordable housing across the board. It would also price out anybody from the middle class being able to live there. So I really, really would urge the city to continue to look at, that as being a part of its future, its future vision. That's, I guess, my final word.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Joe. Next speaker is Carter Kraft. I'm gonna allow you to talk.
Hey, Carter Craft here. Is this working?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Hey, thanks for the opportunity to comment and ask a couple questions. One, as a family who does not own a car in Hoboken and hasn't owned a car for 20 years, me, my spouse, and our 3 kids get around just fine. That said, I do understand and I'm sympathetic for people who have other mobility needs. We're lucky that we don't. 2, I totally agree with the need for a food store. And we need more of that in this town. For those who live in the Southwest, you may or may not remember the Big Banner Plaza, which was a small neighborhood scale shopping center right across from Mama Johnson Field. It got zoned out by the powers that be in this town and basically increased food insecurity for all the people who live there. I want to throw out the example of the Farragut Houses neighborhood in Brooklyn, which is right across the street from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And when that community was faced with the massive rezoning, their city council person went to bat for them to get a food shop. And they got a Wegmans and they got, the grocery store that they had never had. So I just want to stress the point that, if we leave it to the forces of real estate, we will get whatever real estate wants, and that will not include a food store. So if we really want it, I hope our public officials and elected officials will step up. I think the bigger question in this whole plan is more not just what it is in and of the redevelopment zone itself, but it's an opportunity to look at the whole picture of the redevelopment of the railroad yards and the most ridiculous surface transportation circulation at the train station. We have a bus turnaround where the buses can't turn around. They make 3-point turns in that silly little parking lot before they come back under the shed. We have a taxi stand that is the only taxi stand probably in the world where the taxis immediately have to turn around 180 degrees to get people out of there. So I'm curious if we've looked at anything like ways to do a larger traffic circle there to improve circulation for everybody, because maybe all these cars don't have to come all the way into the train station, go down Hudson Street, back up Newark Avenue Plaza, just to go back out after they drop somebody off. 2 other comments, if I may. One is, thank you for sharing the maps. What we don't see in this, they mentioned a couple times, is North Hudson's sewer connection underground. And as mentioned, that is a really, really important infrastructure piece of this puzzle, because that's the way that some of the flood prevention infrastructure, including the pump station by New Jersey Transit, gets stormwater, combined sewer water out of the neighborhood and out on the river. So what I would like to say is that if someone who's participated in rebuild by design projects or the discussions for 10 years, I personally, as a taxpayer, as a ratepayer, am very frustrated that North Hudson has been able to make the whole rebuild by design process work really well for them, including up at Hudson Street and the north end of town and 14th Street and Hudson. I think they have made rebuild by design funding allocation, that $230 million, work really well for them. And I think it's been to the disadvantage of everyone else. North Hudson, through the collection of its sewer rates from all of us, they have a bonding and borrowing capacity in and of themselves. And I find it objectionable that they would be grabbing every piece of the $230 million that came from the federal government that's designed to solve everybody else's flooding problem. Honestly, I think they should be last in line. So I'm very wary when I hear about, their plans or their needs being a driver for this, because I think their past behavior has not been very transparent, and it's been to the disadvantage of the Hoboken taxpayer in the rebuild by design process. The last thing I'd like to add is that the alignments for the rebuild by design infrastructure and the flood barriers, they've been changed before. And DEP's own consultants said that some of these alignments could be changed with FEMA's approval by calling it a quote unquote minor modification. So I don't think that anything is settled with DEP, especially if it's for the greater good of this development site and its town. If there's something that makes more sense for the alignment there, and it can be accomplished with a quote unquote minor modification, point is it's been done before, and if it makes for a better project, we should do it again. So let's not just think about the four meets and bounds of this big weird rectangle. Let's think about what's best for everyone. The last thing I want to mention is I know that Newark Plaza can be sketchy. I know it's a really sad space. Nobody kept the trees alive. There's no place to sit. It's hot as you know what in summer. But that whole area served as the triage area in Hoboken during Superstorm Sandy. So for 3 days, everyone who was evacuated out of the flood-prone areas off of Jackson Street, off of Harrison, off of Monroe, they got brought to City Hall, dropped off out of a National Guard truck, and then lined up under the cover of that CVS awning because there was nowhere else dry in town that people could be assessed by medical personnel, because you couldn't take them to the hospital and Stevens Institute didn't want them on campus. So before we discount the value of what little public open space we have there, we should appreciate the fact that that public space is there to be used and enjoyed by all people, especially when we need it most. Thank you all for your good work. Thank you, Mr. Brown, and other public officials for the opportunity to add to the conversation. Good night.
Thanks, Carter. Appreciate your comments. Next speaker is Stain Ren. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Yes, hi. Thanks for letting me talk, and thanks for the hard work on this plan. I think it's a really good plan. I was one of the people who would have been in favor of concept E there. I guess we were the second most popular concept, although you wouldn't necessarily tell it from the folks on the call tonight. But I do think that the discussion suggesting that this area is at risk of overdevelopment, I think is just missing the potential of this area, given that it's one of the most transit friendly locations, not just in New Jersey, but arguably in the whole country, with the Hoboken terminal right there. And it's exciting to see that we're looking at a plan to really use that space and get a lot more value for people who want to live there, and also for the city in terms of a lot of amenities that can be created by having people there. And I think focusing that space on people who want to live there instead of cars is definitely the right move for such a transit friendly location. I think that, as was said earlier today, if you have parking minimums, you're going to have cars, you're going to increase car traffic and actually increase congestion there, which is just bad for everybody, including current Hoboken residents who do drive. It would be bad for them if you had a parking minimum here and you put 100 new car spaces in that location. So I would strongly urge you to keep the lack of any parking minimums for this plan. The one other comment I had is that I would think that certainly the comments that have been made about the economics of having additional businesses there, like a grocery store or a movie theater or something like that, I think everybody agrees those would be valuable amenities in the neighborhood. My suspicion would be that the economics of that would be improved by an increase in the number of units. I don't know if that's something that could be considered as one of the ways to for the developer to get access to more square footage. But if there was information, for example, showing that you were more likely to be able to support a grocery store if you increase the number of residential units there, I think that would be something that would be very worth considering. And similarly with something like a movie theater or a multi-use space that could have both the sort of higher performing arts that we get to appreciate at Mile Square Theater, but also things like concerts and movies, which I think people would also really appreciate, especially since we've lost the Bowtie Theater here in town. I think that would be a great addition as well. But all of that gets a lot easier if you allow more residential units. And so I'm glad to see that this plan at least has, increasing the value of that space a lot, but I think more can be done, and it would be worth considering as a reason to sort of relax some of the limits if say a developer came back and said, hey, we could get, you know, a grocery store, a movie theater, what have you, if we had more units. That's pretty much what I have, but you know, it's a great plan as is, and potentially could get better. Thanks.
Thank you, Thane. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to move on to Michelle Dixon. We're going to allow you to talk.
Hello. I'm just wondering about the CVS. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I currently go to the CVS a lot and I'm dependent on it to get, you know, my prescriptions and other things. I'm just wondering if, you know, with this new development, is the CVS going to be given some sort of priority to, you know, come back, or is it just kind of, you know, going to be in the same bidding situation as all the other potential companies?
So I guess that would be a question for the property owner, but my understanding, and take this with a grain of salt, just because I'm sort of relaying what my understanding is that they have a lease with CVS that's pretty long term, and it would include coming back to this the site or a proposed building after it's redeveloped. But that's my understanding. Yeah, but I think that the property owner would be the one to give full details on that. But
Okay. Okay, great. And then while the construction is happening, is it going to be relocated, or is it just going to not be there, or are there plans to kind of like maximize the operation of CVS while the construction is happening?
oh, we are. I don't know how close we are to construction. I mean, that's years and years away in terms of getting to construction. So we haven't gotten to that point of the conversation. But if this ever comes to fruition, yes, that would be something that we have to discuss in terms of what happens to the CVS in the interim, or how the building is phased.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. Next question. The next speaker is Tony Soares. Tony, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Look, I love the idea of this area being redeveloped, but I think we have to think in a bigger macro and not, I mean, of course, God is in the details or the success, but I've been involved in redevelopment. I've been to lots of cities, Santa Monica, I used to work there. I've been to Washington, DC Wharf. And in those redevelopment plans, they tell the developer, we need a market, we need a daycare, or we need bike lanes, or we need this or that. And this is what you have to put in there. And then tell us what economics, how that works. But you don't get anywhere past, you know, telling you what you're going to put. I was on the city council when we put the movie theater in. Unfortunately, there was the last administration before this one took out the clause that said you have to maintain that movie theater. They allowed the developer in a court settlement to get out of their obligation to put a theater there in exchange for that upper grand redevelopment. But in something like this, I mean, a case like that, we told them you have to put a multiplex theater there. We want one. We're a city, and because we were a city without a movie theater, within 3 years we put one in and it was there. Of course, we don't have one anymore. Here, if we want an art center or we want a grocery store, you tell them that's what you have to do. We need. I agree that there should be a CVS, and I think they're going to phase it. They're going to do one the south side, and then if it stays, they'll move it. But I think retail is key. We are losing so much retail to daycare centers, and I'm in commercial real estate. I mean, I lease to daycare centers, but in Red Bank, in Jersey City, in other municipalities with similar, you know, vibrant downtowns, they do not allow certain like frosted windows and dark storefronts on their main streets. You can't put, you know, Main Street in Red Bank, you can't even put a real estate office, which I agree with. I want more restaurants and shops and stores. I think that we should, as a former sewage authority commissioner, I agree with a lot of what Mr. Kraft said, but I also think that rebuild by design wall is hideous. That's not a welcoming sight to see. when you're coming into town. I mean, I know flooding's not popular either, but I think that there's got to be a way to make that look better, make it look like seating or make it look like something. I also think we should not narrow that entry point of Washington Street, because the street should look grand. It should look great when people come in. It shouldn't be narrow. We have our north and south end entries are horrible looking. And I also think there was talk about they can't have an orchestra pit, which I thought was funny, because in Manhattan they're raising the Palace Theater 150 feet in the air, and a 122-year-old theater house, and that's still going to have an orchestra pit starting on the fourth floor of the building, because they're putting retail into the base of that building, and that exists already. So I think the key is the city needs to say, this is what we are going to make you do, and if you don't do it, you don't go anywhere with it. I mean, I know that's, and also I think there has to be real key, because we fail every time with ADA access. I mean, everyone says, oh yeah, bikes, that's great. But let's face it, no one is riding in, to a formal affair. I mean, very few people are going to ride to a formal affair on their bicycles. I mean, I go out to Morristown Performing Arts Center. I meet my family out there. They have parking. I mean, it's very hard after a show lets out to get a New Jersey Transit train back to Hoboken. And because if I want to do that, I can't go out to dinner. I can't spend money in Hoboken. I can't do anything. And you just come, you see the show and you leave. I think local people don't need to park up there, just like I think local people can, walk to most of the stuff in town if they're able. But I think it's really important that we tell the developers, who are reputable guys and they have an outstanding architect, this is really what we need. And I also think if you're going to do a performing arts center, that I would advise, and I think that they would do this, bring in an architect to work on the project with them that has done performing arts centers. So we don't end up like, I remember when the MSTA was promised the theater space, when they got it, it's basically not really what they needed. It's like we were given a boathouse as a give back uptown. It's not sufficient for the boat community. We were promised a little baseball field at 11th Street. You can't even walk on the grass there because there's a 6-foot fence around it. So we have to make sure our redevelopment plans and agreements have all of these things detailed and no escape from them, because you don't get to break ground or you don't get your CO unless it's done. And that's really what you have to say. And if it means you have to add more density, like I spoke to other gentlemen spoke about, it's important. You're right over a transit hub. This is not in the middle of town. It's not by 4th and Hudson. This is downtown. And quite honestly, I work in the city, my business in the city here. You go to lunch in Hoboken, there's nobody in the restaurants. The town is too quiet for a city during the day. We have to get the suburban mindset out of this town. They mentioned Big Banner. The entire part of the 4th Ward there is now a food desert for some of the neediest people in town who don't have cars. We've got to bring retail back, and this project we have to hold the line on that. And I think you can tell them whatever you want. I mean, the city can tell them and they'll do it, because the economics are there, and the economics start when the apartments start, and they're going to make money no matter what we ask for on the lower floors. And I think we should also make sure that they hide the roof mechanicals. I mean, I love the new Stevens building, but you drive up 7th Street and all you see are giant HVAC units. In Hoboken, we lower the height just to but then the HVAC units are exposed, and we have no buildings with like a nice rooftop. They're all like strange looking exposed mechanicals and ugly elevator banks. And we need to kind of bring some fine architecture back. And I'm not saying that this won't be, but I think that because I know the architect is outstanding, but I just want to say, we need to really elevate the quality of our redevelopments here and make sure that we don't push everything down to like a tiny height just to tell ourselves we're still small and quaint. If we want all these things, we're going to have to pay for it in height. And I don't think you're really disrupting anything over in this part of Hoboken anyway. It's still going to be pretty bright and sunny. But anyway, I've spoken enough. Thank you very much.
Tony, thank you for your comments. It was really appreciated. Thank you. Next speaker is Steve Dunn. I'm going to not allow you to speak.
Evening. I came in late. Let me ask first, are the various options still in play? There are like 5 different options. Is that a subject to public opinion in part as to what's ultimately selected?
No, so the concepts that we presented to the public, I think it was in September or October. We had those 5 different concepts. We did go over what the public's feedback on those comments were and what people's preferences were and what their comments were. Yeah, you're seeing right now the questionnaire that we put out to the public. We got about 1,300 responses. Most people liked the open air plaza with a C-shaped with what we call the C-shaped building. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the building's going to look like, but having an open air plaza and with a height of 140 feet, more or less. So that was what people generally liked the most. But we also got a lot of feedback on the Performing Arts Center in terms of people liking the use, but not necessarily loving the height. And I think that's reflected in our conversation here, where and not everyone's saying that the height is a problem. It's just I think it's a discussion point, a well-worn discussion point.
I see. So no decision has been made per se of what option to go with.
Well, I think that if there's a decision, I think it's probably going to be something that's more something that's more this scale of
The
project.
140 foot, the 140 foot.
It
Okay, well, that's good, because I don't like that tall building. And so to the extent public opinion matters, I think that building is out of scale. I think as a policy matter, to allow buildings to be built to the sky to get so-called amenities tends to be mistaken. And sometimes the amenities you get aren't really worth what you get as far as something that scars the landscape. So I'm pleased that that skyscraper option appears not to be the option that's in play. And then there was a comment about retail, and I heard what the gentleman said, but in that corner of town, retail is pretty vibrant. So in other areas of town, it isn't, but in that area, it really is. And certainly the bars are, I know, because I live near them. And then the final opinion of one old man is I totally agree with the comments of the gentleman about not having parking requirements. I think having parking does attract more cars and is not what we're looking for. But we should, of course, have adequate drop-off zones and whatnot, so people can take their Ubers and whatnot to access the transportation hub and so forth. But we should not have parking requirements. I also think if you're going to have a huge auditorium, which I guess wouldn't be in play with the high-rise building not being in play, the gentleman saying that for big formal events, a lot of people in their fancy tuxedos and whatnot probably do want to use cars. I guess they could be Ubers, but they may not want to take the path and whatnot. So those are just my opinions. I am relieved because that tall building, I don't like super tall buildings in general. And I certainly didn't like that one. So thank you very much, Chris. And thank you for your hosting this presentation.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate those comments. Lucinda Mercer, you're next to speak. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Okay, I have unmuted myself. I'll make this brief. I would like to second the comments that Chris Adair made. I am a cyclist who resides in Ward 1. And so I, am a big fan of encouraging cycling, big fan of having a decent bike lane on Washington, preferably one that cars cannot park in. And I would like to encourage more cycling, more bike parking, as opposed to less. I would say also as a resident of the first ward, it sure would be nice to have a supermarket and in this area. And as somebody who used to walk to the Bowtie theaters, it'd be nice to have a movie theater. So I'm basically echoing some of the comments that people have made in the past. I just want to get that on the record as being in favor of that. You know, I also take to heart the comments of the gentleman who said that a performing arts center is not just, you know, theater. Like it can be much broader than that. And well, I am actually in favor of the third option, option C, which does not have the tall building. I think if there is a way to have some kind of a performing arts center / movie theater / something, that would be great. So that's pretty much all I want to say.
Thank you, Lucinda. Yeah, those are great comments. I really appreciate that.
Mhm.
And our last speaker is Manuel Rivera Soler. I'm going to allow you to speak. Manny, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good evening, Director Brown and everyone. Thank you for reserving me towards the end. I should have taken a snack before, but I appreciate all the comments. I appreciate everyone's hard work and dedication to this project. But this project, like you said, it's just we're throwing out into the air to see what sticks to whatever a developer is going to ultimately decide to do. Of course, hopefully taking into consideration what the citizens have put forward. Now, that's an ideal world. We know that we don't live in an ideal world. I sit through many meetings and different planning boards and zoning boards and such. And when the public asks for certain things, sometimes they just seem to be ignored. But I hope in this case, being that this has so much attention, it does not get ignored, that the people's ideas do factor in. And I've seen that they have in this approach that you have presented this evening. Now, having said that, that was a preamble. Having said that, I am very concerned, Director, with the affordable housing situation, as a member of the public had mentioned, and you're looking for examples. The people who are in these buildings perhaps are even afraid to be put out there as an example because they're so appreciative that they have an apartment. But in most cases, sometimes these things do occur. I'm not saying always, but that do get the apartment that's been set aside and it's facing the back or it's facing the end of the hallway. It's kind of like, you know, yeah, let's give them that one because that works for what we have to do. So it's not a criticism, it's an observation. And but so we need to put more thought when we allow these things, that we have someone in the municipality that could go back and say, okay, so where are these apartments? Perhaps they are, I don't know, because I'm not there, and say, okay, we see them and they passed mustard. You follow what I'm saying, Director? So if not, I could stop and you could answer back, or I could continue.
No, please continue.
Okay, so that being said, also the workforce, another member of the public mentioned, which is true, even though it might not be in this project, but we have to, if we could include something in this project, because right now in the city is proposing this coming Wednesday on their agenda to reduce or take away a ordinance that was made for persons to work in the city, meaning in the police, to have to live in the city. Now, I'm of two minds on that because yes, I would prefer that my police officers live in the city where they work, because that way they get a good feel to what they're going to be exposed to, as opposed to someone that lives, I don't know, somewhere else 2 hours, 3 hours away and just driving in and just does not have the same feel for the city. So that would be something that we could look into as well, maybe in this project and another project, and do as someone said, when you make these agreements with these developers, say, these are the things that we definitely would prefer or want. Can you work with this? If not, let's get someone else, because I see a lot of places that we put, oh, are you amenable to it? Yeah, we're amenable to it, but then they don't do it because they're too far in, or we're too far into their deal, and we don't want to mess up or waste money or time. So these are concerns. And in regards to parking, that's always going to be there. If the people who live in this building don't want to drive cars, it's totally up to them, but we should have an all-around approach. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because yes, in the Chambord building, or the former Chambord building, allegedly, it's also going to have a parking garage, as well as a supermarket. Now, I say allegedly because when I was at that meeting, the final meeting, one of the developers, I asked the question, and there's someone in this panel that could give testimony to that too, that I asked him, do you think you're going to have a supermarket in this building? And he says, oh, I guarantee I will have a supermarket in this building. So that may be something that the residents in the first ward and in the fourth ward could take, to heart. That at least something is coming. But do we need more? We definitely need more. So again, these are just things that I'm throwing out in the air. And because you left me at the end, I guess I'm just like, I'm giving a synopsis of what everybody had mentioned before. But it is important, it is important to have these things said, because if you're putting more charging stations, then would that not attract more cars to come into Hoboken that are electric, to charge their vehicles, to park in Hoboken? Then the mere thing that you say that we incentivizing people to not have cars because we're going to make the building all bikes, that again, that's a utopia. That is a wonderful desire to have, and I don't take it away from anyone, the prior speakers who spoke as well. Yes, that would be perfect, but I can't ride a bike. I'm still young enough to ride it, but I can't ride a bike because of conditions that I have. See, so not everybody can ride a bike, even if they want to. So we have to always have a holistic approach where everything could be on that table. And, parking, if that's not a possibility, then let the people know so that you can sell this project. Let the people know what's going to be adjacent to it that you can use, as well as, of course, the beautiful idea that you're going to have in the rest of the area for where the path station is going to be also in the future, was going to be developed into a different thing. So anyway, I don't want to continue because I don't want the meeting to take any longer, but those are the things that people need to always consider. There's so much, and because this is such in the infancy stage, we have to continue to speak about it. You might have to make more meetings. You might have to do more surveys, but people have, like I said, a lot of opinions. Movie theaters versus, an art center, they all sound great. I want them all. Can we put all three of them in there? But that's the thing. We have to find a happy medium. And I know that you guys, the people who work in this will do a good job. And I appreciate, again, everyone who was attended the meeting, and all of you, director, and all of the here and the council people who spoke earlier as well. And thank you, and have a good evening. And I hope, we do get a good development out of this.
Thanks, Manny. I appreciate that. And just supermarket is a permitted use on the ground floor. So how we address that further in the plan, we'll huddle up and discuss that further. But yeah, I appreciate your comments, and it's all we're listening to everyone. So thank you. And Manny, that you were the last speaker. So I'd like to I'm going to let Council President Emily Jabbour say the last word. Just before Emily says the last word to close the meeting, I just want to thank RJ Deerfield and Casey Wolf from Community Development, who not only worked on this presentation, but the massings, the redevelopment plan that's guiding all this to date. So thank you very much, Casey, RJ, Jessica, if you're listening to this recording in the future. So Emily, I will pass over to you to say the last word.
I'll just add my thanks, certainly, to the team involved in the presentation, to everyone from the members of public participating and sharing your feedback. Basically the next steps, just to sort of line this up, is the subcommittee will take the feedback that was discussed here tonight, feedback from council members. Thank you to all the council members who were part of this evening's meeting as well. have some conversations about how that will inform the next stages of the plan. And then eventually that plan will come back from the subcommittee and before the council and will be on the agenda. So we're going to see how this progresses. It probably is likely to be, I would say, Director Brown, I think ballparked it within the next few months or so, give or take. If you know that folks had feedback this evening and weren't able to participate for any reason, I know Director Brown provided his email. Certainly feel free to reach out to him or any of your council members as well. I'm sure would be happy to share and pass it along to the subcommittee overseeing this process. Thank you again, Director Brown, for facilitating tonight. You did a great job and appreciate again everyone's time.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Paul.
Good night.
Thanks so much.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.